For the very first video edition of the show, I am delighted to be joined by Professor Elliott Bayev. He's the owner of the OpenMat family of mixed martial arts schools. He's also the co-author of Sales Jiu Jitsu, the owner of BJJ 101.tv, UnderstandingJujitsu.com. He's the founder of globalunity.org and Fight to Unite. We talk about his history in martial arts, his success as an entrepreneur, and his hopes to make the world a better place. So, without further ado, on with the show. All right, I am delighted to be joined today by Professor Elliott Bayev, a second-degree Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Blackbelt. He's also the owner of the OpenMat family of mixed martial arts schools. He's the co-author of the upcoming book, Sales Jiu Jitsu. He's also the owner of BJJ 101.tv, UnderstandingJujitsu.com, the founder of Fight to Unite Grappling Tournament, founder of globalunity.org, and much more. Elliott, how are you? Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Phil. It's great to see you. Doing really well.
Yeah. I should also point out the most important thing is that you promoted me twice to blue belt. So that's actually the thing that we should talk about the most. You were my first jiu-jitsu instructor, and I'm very thankful for that and thankful that you could join me today. The first thing I wanted to ask you about was maybe you can talk about what is your first martial arts memory?
Probably watching really inappropriately violent martial arts movies with my dad as a 4 or 5-year-old, as well as around the same time hearing his stories. He grew up in Russia in gangs since he was like 5. It was a really rough time right after World War II. And so, I would constantly hear about not only kind of his fisticuff stories, but a lot of stories of him intervening when, say, someone was being attacked, and a lot of wild stories of him in war. But I think that initial kind of exposure of this kind of cool, powerful thing, and then tying it to, like, he would tell me stories of being on a bus and, a bunch of guys starting to harass a girl, and he was already like a pretty aggressive guy, but he'd go over and, maybe not as gently as he could have tried to kind of calm a situation down, and then when that didn't work, you just break all their fingers and whatnot. So I guess early on I got exposed to this idea of like might for right, or using kind of power to help and protect others.
Okay, and then when was the first time that you yourself became interested in martial arts as something you'd like to pursue?
Well, interested is separate from actually doing it. When I first, so I think I was maybe 9, was getting bullied a bit, and so very impulsively, my dad just threw me into the first school he found. No kind of vetting of this style, that style, just sign me up. Then it was, you could sign someone up for 5 years, so he signed me up for 5 years in Taekwondo as a kid. Earned, it's kind of laughable, but over that time, earned my black belt in Taekwondo, a black belt that a kid can earn. But and it was something I did kind of as an escape, and kind of just because it was something I got put into. But I never. I always had this idea of like being able to protect myself, or being martial arts making me tough, but I never really felt that. Like anytime I would spar with someone bigger, I felt like the stuff I was learning didn't help me. And so even though I'd kind of risen through the ranks as a kid, I never really felt legit in terms of my power, or the power that I was being told I was kind of accumulating. Don't mind this. It's not what it looks like. It's just coffee in it.
Syrup.
Sure.
Okay, so you had this Taekwondo black belt, but you sort of said you kind of feel like a poser or something. So then what was the next evolution in your martial arts?
So I'd kind of lost interest. I was maybe 14, 15 around the time that I stopped. And then around the same time, a friend, I think you know Yanni, he's an actor, Yanni Gelman. We were
Definitely.
friends in high school, and actor, director, I should say, he, after the second UFC, Ultimate Fighting Championship, his father sent him down to California to train at the Gracie Academy full time for the summer. And after he came back, he was showing me some stuff, and we would all like play fight. And he was kind of the smallest, weakest of all of our group of friends, but all of a sudden, no one could do anything to him. And as someone who really didn't feel the empowerment of the martial arts training I had done, um, it was intriguing, but at the same time, there's something weird that happens in martial arts of kind of this I don't know what you'd call it, but believing your own stuff, so to speak. And I was so convinced, like we would have arguments for months of, Hickson Gracie, who's, for those that don't know jiu-jitsu, is like the legend, the Wayne Gretzky of jiu-jitsu. Oh, he couldn't beat a Shaolin monk because this and that. And then, okay, well, what if it was 100 Hicksons versus 100 Shaolin monks? And we just get into these debates. And I really just didn't believe in jiu-jitsu at all, because I was so groomed on the kind of Bruce Lee movie style of movie impression of fighting that you get growing up. And eventually he started teaching me. Actually, what really opened my eyes, and for anyone who's curious about jiu-jitsu, this is a real eye opener. He had the Gracie in action videotapes, which show you actual matches of black belts in whatever art going and challenging the Gracie family, and every fight just turned out to be the exact same. And so that was pretty convincing. After that, he started training me. We went down to California, or first to Philadelphia, to train at a place called Maxercise with Steve Maxwell, who's now big strength and conditioning nomad, and Phil Migliorese, who owns Balance Studios now in Philadelphia. We went down there, and then the next summer to California to train at the Gracie Academy. And that one thing led to another. We just were training on our own, eventually found some folks online who were also training, and then our little informal training group ended up becoming the first generation of instructors in Toronto. So now many school owners kind of came out of that, or many of those folks evolved into school owners as well.
Okay, that's great. I didn't know that about you and Steve Maxwell. That's awesome. Now, regarding sort of those initial training days and the Gracie in action videos, maybe you can talk a little bit about what jujitsu training and learning was like then compared to even what it's like now.
Well, there's what it was like then, and there was also what I brought to it, in terms of like the mindset and energy. I was, a 16-year-old kid, full of piss and vinegar, and there were no instructors in Toronto. There were no schools in Toronto. If you wanted, the only schools at the time were a place called Grappling Arts Academy, Celine Dan Maroney ran, and the Samurai Club, out of which a number of like top instructors and fighters today. Carlos Newton, who was first Canadian UFC champion, came out of there, and those were kind of out of the way. So in Toronto, there were no actual schools, and even those schools didn't have, say, a legitimate BJJ black belt running them. So most of the learning was coming from videotapes. You'd be lucky to have a traveling blue or purple belt pop in, find you somehow. This was the early days of the internet, and then pop in. So most of it was really just hard grinding. No one to kind of teach us not to go so hard, and so as a result, a lot of people didn't make it because they just got hurt. and it was really much a survival of the fittest. It was still a good atmosphere in a lot of ways, but it was just it was all about tenacity and aggression, rather than sophisticated technique or the kinds of things that really informed how I am as a teacher on a lot of levels. Because I always felt like I was missing that guidance, not only kind of from a teacher as a whole, but specifically the instruction, which is why I've put so much time and attention into the curricula that I've tried to develop.
Okay, great. So you said you're 16 when you're sort of doing this training, early training in the Toronto BJJ community. But you're still an adolescent. And so maybe you can talk about, like, growing up, deciding what you're going to do with your life versus, pursuing this pastime.
Or, um, I think I grew up with the same frame that most of us do. Go to school, go to university, get a career, get a job, get a career, get married, and etc. And I was in after high school. I was at U of T, um, studying just general arts. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and then it was kind of in the middle of the .com boom, the first .com boom, and I had an idea for effectively a marketing company called Awesome Contests. It would create, uh,
Awesome
now,
contest?
yeah, right. So it was a gamified participatory contest platform, I suppose. Had some mentors come in, support it. So I left school to kind of try to get that off the ground. Ended up moving back in with my folks to save funds while I did that. Then the .com bust happened, and uh, around the same time, Yanni's brother, actually, Dan Gelman, offered me a job in sales. So I moved into the corporate world. I was doing corporate sales initially for a conference company, creating business conferences. And then one of my mentors from Awesome Contest recruited me to go work at his startup, which was selling actually pretty ahead of its time web communication tool for marketers to kind of really listen to the voice of their people. It was a good job. It was a good career for the time in my life. I was making very good money, and even it's not like I hated it. But it was around the same time that um, I read a book that kind of woke me up to people suffering in the world, and that kind of that was big influence in some of my shifts. Um, and
What was the book? If
it's called No Logo, by an
Naomi
agent,
Klein.
Naomi Klein. And I was just so, I mean, it's heartbreaking to, especially the bubble of naivete I was coming from, that, like, you know yeah, not everyone's as well off as I am, but, generally I had this idea that things were good in the world. And then, she would talk, and this was before it was a little more common knowledge, and maybe made much thanks to her it is, but about sweatshops and the kind of working conditions of um, people that were making the clothes that were on my back, and dying in factory fires and all sorts of terrible things. And so it woke me up to that side of reality. And so I did what I thought you do. I joined different human rights groups and went to protests and rallies. And then we don't need to get onto this yet, but then I got exposed to a few other works and ideas that shifted my perspective on all that. And we can talk about that, but realizing that while this is happening, helping marketers sell more cars or makeup or whatever it was, again, it was good work. It's not like the people I worked for or the clients I was serving weren't great people too, but it didn't feel like that was going to help me make the impact I want. And so literally within a day of figuring out how I could make it work, how would I pay the bills while I started on this path, I quit my job, cashed in my life savings, and then started my first school, which was Kimono Girl talked about, but it was really so that I could make this bigger impact, which we can get into. But I left the long story that I don't always tell, is that I was at a jiu-jitsu tournament in 2004 in New Jersey, went down with a whole bunch of friends, and had such a great time, did very well, won my division, and I was a blue belt, there was a purple brown black division, fought a black belt for the first time, did very well against him. And it was just such a fun, empowering experience. It was so healthy. And then going back into the office on Monday felt a little tough because there was something that was so healthy on every level. And it was good for me. It was good for the people involved. And it just felt tough to kind of go back into that regular routine. And on the way back from that trip, I was thinking about, I'd been thinking about getting a tattoo for a while, and I kind of didn't know what I wanted, but I was so enamored with the feeling of being there with the people I cared about, that I wanted to capture that feeling. I was thinking, oh, jiu-jitsu, no, it's not really the right, like, it's not just about jiu-jitsu. And I realized what I didn't want to have happen was I didn't want to wake up in 30 or 40 years and realize I had gone down that path of, school, university, wife, white picket fence, kids, grandkids, and then you die. Like, um, what I didn't want to have happen was that I would fall into living someone else's dream. And so I got the word dream tattooed backwards on my chest, meant to be this long-term reminder. But what happened is every morning I'd be waking up and dream would be like blazing into my head. And it was within 3 months of that I kind of shifted gears entirely. And the day after I figured out kind of the logistics of making it work, I'd asked to be laid off, and yeah, got things started.
Okay, great. And okay, so there was a lot there. We will definitely talk about the sort of that idea of you looking to help others as part of your work. But first, let's continue on with the story of OpenMat and Kimono Girl. So you mentioned you opened Kimono Girl first. Maybe you can talk about that experience and sort of those early years growing pains.
So, when I first got exposed to jiu-jitsu, I mean, personally, I was so enamored with it. But as I said, I always, in the back of my head, martial arts and power in general, the real power of power was to help others, help the powerless. And the Gracies, the founders of jiu-jitsu, they had a women's self-defense program. And that was very intriguing to me. Even in high school at 16, I was trying to figure out how to bring them here for a seminar, and no sense of marketing, but the intention was there. And so when I didn't want to compete with the schools I was training with, and I thought opening a women's school would not do that. It would still, it was never about having a school, but if I'm going to have a school or a career or work, let it at least also be doing good on the way to me doing this bigger good that I was intending. And so women's jiu-jitsu school seemed like a really powerful way to give back, and to use the skills that I built to, without competing with anyone else, um, make an impact along the way to making an impact. So open that. It was starting out of a yoga studio on the West End once a week, like on a Sunday at 5, kind of the worst times you could, and then Got some attention from a yoga studio at Yonge and Eglinton, kind of center of Toronto. We moved there. Fridays and Sundays still bad times, but that grew very kind of art of war, very kind of small wins. We from there moved to another spot, another central spot in another gym, also Yonge and Eglinton, and then out of there we're out of actually three different locations at once. It was very like no overhead or low overhead to grow this thing, which even today to try to run a women only school would be very challenging business. But back in the day before UFC was quite as big as it is, or Jiu-Jitsu was a household name, it was certainly slow going, to say the least. And yeah, so you know you learn and you adapt and you just kind of make the best decision you can at the time to try to grow. Around 2008, like in that time, we had done, and again, being an inexperienced entrepreneur, leading with my heart, and when I say we, friend Steve Gilbert had designed the logo and was kind of helping uh, um, in a more general sense, um, helping run classes or whatever um, as things grew. And then in 2000, oh, sorry, I was talking about what we were doing through Kimono Girl. So we ran classes, but we also ran free women's self-defense seminars. And over the 5 years of Kimono Girl's life, ran 50 of those, served over 1,000 women. And so, and that not only was fun, like I love teaching, but then it felt good to be able to give back, and so that kind of stayed a consistent part of the the school dynamic, even as Kimono Girl evolved into OpenMat.
Okay, so maybe you want to talk a little bit about that then, how OpenMat came out of that, and also at the same time, you're still trying to learn, get better yourself. You're not just teaching others. And from what I recall, you didn't have an instructor, and also you were purple belt, and there's potentially friction about somebody who's a purple belt running a school in the jiu-jitsu community. So maybe you can address all of those things.
Yeah, so 2004 is when I left my job and kind of went full time. That was also the last time I competed for a number of years. In 2001, I had at U of T, somewhere around that time at U of T, my first day at wrestling, um, I got a very severe neck injury. The coach wasn't paying attention. Someone who was being a little more rough than was necessary for what we were doing, um, combined with my not knowing what I should be doing to be a good partner at that time, ended up basically leading to my head almost getting spun 180. That kind of slowly over time caught up with me. Like it was excruciating at the time. Thumbs went numb and tried to continue the class, couldn't. But that led to some pretty rough goings physically. A really tough journey, actually. Um, but it also meant that I, was having a tough time being physical on the mat, and competition was just like not even a possibility at that time. And trying to develop my skill while injured, while all that was going on, was a tough thing. So I focused more on teaching and my own learning, like still watching tapes and DVDs by that point. Um, then at a certain point, I think we even moved. I lived in a big house near the gym with a bunch of other people. We matted the basement, and I would start teaching out of there to kind of make ends meet with private lessons. Uh, Kimono Girl started doing. I mean, it just things got tough on a number of levels, especially with me not being able to physically teach as much. So and this was actually quite challenging at the time. But at like 29, I had no other options than to move back home with my girlfriend at the time, and that was a bit of a hit to the ego. Very grateful for my parents being there to support me, but that was a tough time on a lot of levels. And it was around this time that we had the location Young and Bloor, and which was what grew into OpenMat. And so I'd be traveling an hour each way with all my stuff on my back, neck pain, and all that. So I could teach a lunch class and then teach the evening. And part of the impetus was, I mean, I just kept getting requests to teach, and the fact that I was excluding the biggest market in martial arts didn't make sense. And so, with Steve's help, kind of designed a rough logo for OpenMat, and just OpenMat really captured the vibe of what I wanted Kimono Girl to be in the first place, a place where everyone felt welcome. At the time, if you wanted to learn jiu-jitsu, like, you had to go to a pretty grimy gym where guys are in, like, you know, little Valley Tudo shorts, no shirt, and, like, it was just not an environment for the average person, let alone women specifically. And then the idea was that, it's created like the yoga studio of jiu-jitsu, and then with this great vibe that had been created with Kimono Girl, we, started OpenMat, and then what happens is the guys who are coming in are inexperienced, and the girls are experienced. So the girls are beating up the guys. So the only guys that stick around kind of are okay with that, and so just very naturally, this really, like, you're a founding member of OpenMat. It really, I think, has a bit of a unique vibe in among martial arts schools, and a really powerful one. But in large part because of that, because of kind of where, of course, um, every group is influenced by its leader, but as much by its community. And so I tried to um, maintain some of the good vibes that had been, through which, or the foundation of good vibes that had been laid down. And then basically OpenMat, as soon as it launched in 2008, like, quickly overgrew Kimono Girl and had to replace, one class at a time, and then et cetera, et cetera. In terms of people being upset about a purple belt teaching, I don't think that was so much an issue. I mean, there were very few black belts in the country at the time, let alone, like, and most of them had started as teaching as purple belts. Like, that's just how things grew in a place like Toronto that's so separated from a big pool of black belts. So that wasn't so much of an issue as I suppose being, falling in line with community standards that were starting to emerge as jiu-jitsu became more and more organized and legitimate.
Okay, and then what about just even the idea of you not having an instructor and you searching for your continued pursuit of your own black belt?
Um, so that was interesting. The guys that I kind of were training with way back in the day in these community centers, in time they had opened up their own school, and so I was just training with them. But they were very much my training partners originally, and so when they opened their school together, I just kept training with them, and then after a few years, they're running classes. I'm taking those classes. I kind of became their student, and then they split up. Zomar Salvosa and Steve Lin, both very in very different ways, very very good black belts now. And when I had to move back with my parents, Steve's gym was kind of near there, so I tried to continue training with him. And um, I mean, physically that was very tough. And then jiu-jitsu, I wouldn't say until like maybe 2007, 8, even even later, like wasn't so much of a legitimate industry, a legitimate business, and so people were figuring out what that means, and then okay, well, what does it mean if I'm teaching and training with someone else? Like, so various people tried to kind of. I don't mean to frame it in any less than positive way, but they tried to kind of lasso me into some kind of like arrangement under them, and that was not easy to find. So I was basically on my own, and then didn't travel much I guess in my 20s, and then I had a wedding in California in 2006 or 7, and took the opportunity to go train with as many people as I could, train with John Machado and Bravo and Shawn Williams, and just got exposed to so much amazing jiu-jitsu and was really taken with Shawn Williams. We had a student at the time. I mean, I'd already had a relationship with Eddie Bravo. Those that don't know, he's a real innovator in the art and sport, and had some massive accomplishments as well, and very much aligned in terms of the innovation mindset and the systems mindset that he brought to jiu-jitsu. I really love that. And we had a student at the time who also had a relationship there, who so for a while we became a 10th Planet affiliate. And what I've, as a student and as a teacher, what I've always wanted was a white to black belt career, especially from my upbringing being disorganized, training for 5 years before I would learn something that's so basic you should learn it day one. I always just wished I'd had that kind of step-by-step process. And I started around the same time that I started OpenMat. I started going to martial arts business conferences, and I ran into Shawn Williams, who I'd actually been talking to about affiliating, and he was talking to me about his vision for his white to black belt curriculum, and that was so exciting. And a few other things happened, nothing related to Eddie. Like, I'm a big fan of Eddie's. He, at the time, his first book was about one of his jiu-jitsu systems, but the first half was basically his intro talking about why everyone should smoke weed. And as it was trying to build more of like a family business, I didn't know if that was the best fit. And then his next book was about how everyone should do DMT. So still a big fan of his, but chose at the time to affiliate with Shawn Williams because I just, like, as a teacher, I just wanted to be able to give students a structured curriculum. And like 10th Planet has nothing if not structure. Like, it's well structured, but it's that's Eddie Bravo's school system. But it's a little more sport oriented, a little more aggression oriented versus self defense. What I didn't want, especially with our focus on women, I didn't want someone to come in looking for self defense, and I'm only able, I haven't developed that part of myself or my training to be able to really give them these skills. Because when I started, there was no distinction between self defense and sport, and like jiu-jitsu is learning how to survive and win fights. And it evolved into a sport in time, but I wanted to be able to give. I wanted to make sure my fundamentals were solid, and I was just so blown away by the level of precision in Shawn Williams' technique. He's a Renzo Gracie black belt, and his communication style seemed like such a nice guy too. So chose to affiliate with him. That was probably like 2008 or so. It must have been 2009 or 10. And that was really game changing for the school because we never really got to. I never really got to kind of get into a white to black belt curriculum with him, but he taught me his blue belt curriculum. And you probably remember I brought that back to Toronto, and then we brought it into the school. And just having that structure, having that organization, having that level of professionalization did a lot for me as a teacher, did so much for the students. And so it showed me the power of having organized structure and bringing organized structure to jiu-jitsu, which is why I've put so much time in since then into that kind of thing. So it was a little all over the place, but that's a bit of an intro to the open mat story.
Yeah, no, that was great. I'll just add a couple of points just from my recollection from there. You mentioned, going into open mat and having to deal with these girls who just wreck you. That is definitely something that happened, and it's a testament to the school and jujitsu. I distinctly remember early on. You put me against this young woman. I think her name is Karen, and she's smaller than me, maybe like 115, 125, and I'm not a big guy. And I was pretty wild, a lot of energy. I was respectful, like I wasn't trying to hurt anybody, but I probably was going too hard. And she would have put me out if it didn't take long, and it didn't take long at all. So and that was I thought that was awesome. And I don't remember ever seeing anybody who got upset that they lost to a girl, but I'm sure it happened. I mean, they probably didn't come back, but I don't know. It was a good vibe. And then, back to Shawn Williams and Eddie Bravo. I love both of them. Like, I love Eddie's system. I still use some of his stuff. His lockdown is key still today for me. It's really important. And then, Shawn, when you brought him in, that was towards the end of my time at I did get promoted, thankfully, when you were under Shawn there. And he was just such a great guy, great attitude, and it was a super great vibe. So so at that time, which is I think 2010, 2011, that's when I have to part ways because I move out of the city. And at this almost the exact same time, you begin growing pretty rapidly. So maybe you want to talk about that phase in the open mat story.
I mean, with the reality TV show, The Ultimate Fighter, Jiu-Jitsu, MMA was now kind of on TV. Whereas, like, by contrast, when I started mid to late 90s, every person in Toronto, GTA, who did jiu-jitsu, if they wanted to watch UFC, they would go out to Etobicoke, the Don Cherry's, the one place that would have it on like one or two screens. But now it was a household name, and jiu-jitsu is becoming a household name. So it's part of the nature of the growth of the sport, the nature of the growth of reputation. Like, we're starting to have students compete and do well. I was still competing, or I got back into competition, which is a story we should come back to at some point. But
it's next on my list, actually.
And so that was around 2009, 10, yeah. And around the same time, a student who had moved to Toronto after school, we just hit it off. He was a friend or a student of a friend, so I'd had a good relationship with them. He ended up training with me. Was thinking about actually going back and buying the school that he had trained at originally. That fell through, and so we got to talking, and he chose to invest in OpenMat, and so we moved from the Good Life Fitness gym that we were renting space out of, like putting mats down, folding mats every day, and picking them up every day, and cleaning them every day. We moved to a beautiful space at the center of the city, Yonge and Bloor. For those that don't know Toronto, I wouldn't say it's the Times Square of Toronto, but it's like two subway lines, access right at it. And this place had windows on three sides and a skylight, and we really went all out on decking it out. And so that just, caused some explosive growth over the next few years.
Okay. And then you mentioned at the same time, you're getting back into competition for years. I mean, you were dealing with these injuries. And so what changed and how did that come about?
Uh, the full story is kind of interesting. So for those that don't know, uh, Abu Dhabi is the it's kind of the Olympics of jiu-jitsu. Um, that's really cool story actually. A sheik who had gone to I think San Diego to do his MBA undercover, started jiu-jitsu, fell in love with jiu-jitsu, and then when he graduated, it was time to move back. He revealed to his instructor who he was and invited him back to basically start a jiu-jitsu revolution in Abu Dhabi, which has since happened. And he basically created what amounts to a Street Fighter tournament where he, for the first time in history, put up real money for a jiu-jitsu competition. Jiu-jitsu normally is in the gi, traditional-looking thick uniform that you can choke people and throw people with. This was more what you would wear in wrestling, just like shorts and a t-shirt, no gi, as it's referred to. And he flew in the best fighters in the world from all over to Abu Dhabi, had some real production value behind it, and ran this first tournament. And so that was kind of the pinnacle, one of the pinnacles of this competition. And I was in a pretty rough space before moving back in with my folks, maybe 2006, 7. And I saw a movie called The Secret on at one of those times, and a lot of people have issues with the movie. I have issues with the movie if you interpret it as, well, just imagine the things you want and you don't have to work for them. That obviously doesn't make sense. But at the same time, as someone who didn't grow up with these kinds of ideas or any like personal development talk or that being like an aspect of life, it was a real revelation that even just this idea that this is possible. And so uh, things get bad financially and with my body, have to move in with my parents, can't train, let alone teach, let alone compete. And yet, I have this idea in my head that, oh, the secret's real and you just so this, it was right when it was around the same time, like my neck got really bad. Twice in my life it gave out. And if I wanted to even, I was in bed for 3 weeks. If I wanted to, I wasn't paralyzed, but I couldn't stand. If I wanted to stand, I couldn't support my head. I had to like prop it up on I had to like support it on my collarbone. And that was pretty tough because, a movie I think is really important for a lot of athletes to see, or a book that's really valuable is The Peaceful Warrior, about a gymnast who gets in a bike accident and has to confront like who is he without his art or his activity. And for me this was very real. And I say right now I was in bed for 3 weeks, like, okay, that's not so bad. But the psychologically what's happening is like, okay, it's been an hour and this thing's still not going away. How bad is this? And then 2 hours and then 5 hours and then, oh, it's been a day, it's still there. And after a few days, like, is this the new normal? Is this like, am I ever going to be able to train again? Am I ever going to be out of pain again? And following the kind of prescription of The Secret and some of the features that kind of led to, I remember writing down when I was kind of at my worst, serious pain. Um, they suggest writing out what you want as though you have it now. So I still have this paper. Like, I'm so happy and grateful that I have a healthy, strong, vibrant neck. And I didn't believe it at all. It was painful to write it out. But, put it out there. And in time, I started healing a bit, but I had also written down some other audacious goals. For those that don't know, Marcelo Garcia is, many consider, myself included, the greatest of all time in the sport of jiu-jitsu. And I'd gotten to do a seminar with him. So I'd written down two outlandish goals. This was, I think, 2007. One was to train with Marcelo. Two was Abu Dhabi 2009. For a purple belt, who can't even train, let alone compete, to believe that he would be able to even get into the biggest tournaments in the world that's reserved only for the best black belts in the world. Pretty preposterous. But, they say you don't need to know how you're going to do it, just write it down. So I did, and throughout, as 2008 came, I started healing slowly, and eventually found some exercises I could do to strengthen my neck. Eventually, the pain started going down enough that I could actually start training. And still, starting to get back to training, the idea that I could even compete in this tournament was preposterous. But all of a sudden, they announced a new Abu Dhabi tournament that was in the gi. And not only did they have a Canadian qualifier, but it had a purple, brown, black division. So even, again, to think that I could go in and, win a purple, brown, black division was quite a bit of a stretch. But out of nowhere, this impossible dream now at least had hope. It had possibility. And so 2008 continues, keep training, keep healing. 2009 comes, I'm actually feeling pretty good. And then the tournament comes up, and it's in Montreal, and still have a lot of reservations. I'm doing pretty well in training by that point, but on the way to Montreal, a friend gave me a book that I recommend to all students called Mind Gym, and it was the first sports psychology book that I had read. And I got on the train with a lot of doubts, and I got off the train with a lot of confidence, and went in. Basically, long story short, won the tournament, and all of a sudden, this impossible dream that had no path to get there was real. And then my friend Andrew McInnes, who had also won his division, he had moved to Florida where Marcelo Garcia was training, and invited me to train with him. Marcelo was obviously going to be invited, and so all of a sudden, in a basically span of 10 minutes, these two impossible dreams had come true. And it's funny for me that should have been a sign that, wow, there's some use at least to this stuff, this manifesting idea. But coming from such a rationalist background and mindset, it's not something I necessarily gave enough time and energy to at that time. Something I'm returning to now, but it's a pretty eye-opening experience at the time, to say the least. And then, got to go to Abu Dhabi, got to train with Marcelo for a month leading up to it. So he and his wife, Tatiana, so warm and welcoming. The training was incredible. Got to spend time with him. He was rooming with Cobrinha, another legend of the sport. I was rooming with my friend Andrew. And so the whole experience was amazing. And really started with just, that the, Eastern philosophy has been a big influence for me. And there's a line in the Tao Te Ching, the biggest tree in the world starts from the tiniest sprout. And I think the idea is the biggest accomplishments start with the smallest thing in the universe, which is a thought. And all that happened, life-changing experiences all started with just having an idea and writing it down. So, lesson that I'm trying to integrate a little more into how I approach life now.
That's great. Back to the secrets. I am very much a rationalist, and The Secret and other sort of self-help, quote unquote, type books of its ilk, I definitely would have poo-pooed long ago. And I've revisited that idea a lot recently. And not so much that, as you say, you're not going to manifest Scarlett Johansson just with the will. As much as I've tried, it hasn't happened.
How would that
But you can't deny, positive thinking versus negative thinking. If you don't think you're going to get achieve a goal, you're right. So, and that, so I wanted to talk on this a little bit later, but you mentioned this idea of writing down these goals and them manifesting. And you've told me about sort of this yearly ritual that you take part in. So maybe you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So yeah, this is, I mean, it's a process I've been doing now for probably 10 or 12, maybe 15 years. My parents uh, got married on Christmas Day. And so I was always used to, and they would always go, on vacations or things like that. Um, so I was used to spending the holidays by myself, and um, I really like kind of time alone, especially with things being so busy in day to day life. So what I started around this time, 2007, 8, is I would take that week and I would totally isolate. I wouldn't answer the phone, wouldn't check email, and I would just sit by myself and really dream. And it's now I call it like life crafting or dream casting, but it's a process of um, capturing all the possible thoughts that come to you and creating a plan out of it. So take a week by myself. Actually, the way I would explain it, I've been helping a few people with this process recently. If I ask you to think about what's the most impactful, meaningful thing you want to do with your life in the next 10 minutes, it's like it's too small a window to think about. You need to think about a longer time horizon. Or if I ask you, okay, what's the biggest thing you want to do with your life in the next 30 years, and you got to answer me in 10 minutes, well, that's also a bit of a small window. So I take a week so that I have a big window to think in, and I think basically as long term as I can. So I've developed a few questions and a few processes that help me. But one of the problems with thinking about what's the biggest impact, there's this expression: most people overestimate what they can do in a year and underestimate what they can do. Right? We're I won't spoil your age. I'm about 40. Right? Average lifespan right now, before all the impacts of human longevity development and medicine progress, um, is about 75, 80. So even just me, I've got 30, 40 more years left. What could you do in 30 or 40 years? What could you not do? Billions have been raised and lost. Countries have been formed and destroyed. The world's been changed in far less time. And so thinking in that kind of time scale takes the limits off. And so I have a set of few questions that I try to ask myself. Another is, and Tim Ferriss has some similar questions, and he really, like, hats off to him on so many levels. But he has similar process he calls like lifestyle design, and that's, I think, a really important part of designing your day to day, not just like this goal, that goal. But what does regular life look like? But one of the questions I'll ask is, if I had all the time and all the money and all the support in the world, what would I do? And the reason that's such an important question is, again, because it takes all the limits off. And yeah, that might not be your reality today, but whatever comes to mind, whatever resonates with you when there are no limits, is kind of points you towards fulfillment. And you may not be able to get there tomorrow or in a year, but just knowing what direction really calls you is vitally, vitally important. We'll come back to why, but just to explain some of the process as well. So I take Sharpies and a whole bunch of blank paper, and I create a page for every area of my life: relationships, finances, health, my jujitsu, things that I want to buy, just everything. And I litter my place with, like, my couch is covered in papers, my tables, my counters. And because I'm using Sharpies, I can see them from across the room. And what happens is, any idea that comes to my mind, doesn't matter how silly or obscure, I'll write it down. And so, one, I'm giving myself the space to dream freely, but I'm allowing the ideas to cross pollinate. I'm allowing the ideas to have sex and emerge new ideas. So I had this idea for relationships, and I had this idea for travel. What if I could merge those? Or I had a business idea, but I wanted to travel here and I wanted to learn more about this thing. How could I merge them? And that just happens very organically when you can see all your thoughts across the room. And to look back on this process every year, look at things that I wrote down 12 months ago as like, oh, this is an impossible dream, but I'll write it down anyway. And then it happened like 3 months in, is a really empowering thing to see, and then to reinvigorate the process itself. Um, so a few unlimited questions. I have, and I've shared this. I've probably shared a version of this with you before. I share this with anyone who kind of comes to me. That's kind of part of the martial arts thing of like, you inadvertently end up guiding or mentoring people. Um, I've shared it before, but not everyone can take a week, and so I was a few years ago, I was talking to one of our students, Jonathan, who owns an investment firm and was actually thinking about starting his own, or he was running one for a bigger organization, thinking about starting his own, and couldn't get a week. He had two young kids, so I suggest, so we talked, figured out. He got a day by himself in a hotel. His wife took care of the kids. If you can only get like 4 hours, great. Everyone's busy, especially if you have kids, life changes. But if you can just get some time to yourself, no distractions, because the headspace you're in, the way of thinking, is just so drastically different that it's really important to give yourself that space. So that's generally the process. The reason I think it's so important, and this is kind of how people see my story generally. They're like, "Oh wow, you followed your dreams. You didn't do what others expected you to, following the traditional path. You pursued your passion." We'll come back to that, but um, why that's important is comes back to an idea from the Tao Te Ching. So for those that don't know, the Tao Te Ching is a 25-ish, 100-year-old Chinese philosophy book that, as someone who grew up a rationalist and I would say an atheist, um, finding a philosophy book that wasn't dissonant. It didn't ask me to believe in some deity. It didn't. There's no magic to it. There's no historical reference. There's no instance where it says this happened in this period. There was no need for suspension of disbelief. It really resonated, and so it's been a big kind of guiding force almost for me for some time. And one of the ideas, so it's Tao Te Ching. Ching means book. Tao means, it's kind of an untranslatable word. Means kind of the way of the universe, the way of existence. But De means virtue. Virtue not as the way we think of it in Judeo-Christian cultures of moral piety, but virtue as a superpower. And it's a weird concept for us to wrap our heads around, but the idea, the book, is that if you align your actions with the way, so to speak, of the universe, your actions gain a power. Like, okay, what does that mean? The way I understand it and teach it now is, if you're over here and you want to go over here, what's the shortest distance? Straight line. Does that change if you're in a pool? Not really. But what if you think you're in a pool, but you're really in a river? You try to go from here to here, you have to swim so hard upstream just to get there. And so to get that result takes a lot of effort. And one of the big teachings or ideas in the Tao Te Ching is doing without doing things effortlessly. So how do you get from here to here with no effort? Well, if you realize you're in a river and you're already pointed in a certain direction, all you have to do is make the slightest shift in direction, and the river will take you there. can Superman lift 1,000 pounds? Yes. Can a human being? Some human beings can. But what makes it a superpower when Superman does it? It's no effort. And so, okay, well, that sounds nice, but how do we actually, it sounds airy fairy, like, how do you apply it practically to life? Well, you have to understand what that river is: passion, excitement. That river is whatever is calling you. Say you love podcasting, but you hate accounting, right? 10 hours of podcasting versus 1 hour of accounting. Or for anyone listening, like, what's your passion? What's the activity you like the least? 10 hours of the thing we love versus 1 hour of the thing we hate. Like, one drains us of energy, the other gives us energy. And the reason it's so important for people to find and pursue their passions is because this goes back to a really cool model. Happy to share, but it stems out of this model, the 5 classes of pleasure, which basically one of the ideas from it is pleasure is fuel. And so following your passions gives you fuel. If you're doing something you love, the reason it's so important to do something you love versus something you don't is you will have 1,000 times the energy if you're doing something you love. And you will go that extra mile. You will stay up late. But if you're doing something that is dissonant, like it's a grind just to show up. And so this is one of the reasons I think it's so important. Making a career out of your passion is a different discussion. This is one of the reasons I think it's so important to pursue passion, because it really, it's invigorating. And yes, it can be scary to start your own thing or to not do the traditional thing. But this is the thing, when I first left my job, people were like, "Oh, that's so brave." I was like, it would have taken so much more courage to stay in something I knew would not make me happy than to take a risk on, quote unquote risk on doing something that I love. So yeah, I strongly encourage it, and it's kind of coming back to haunt me ironically, but I strongly encourage people to at least get in touch with themselves and know what calls to them.
And if it's accounting and podcasting, maybe you can merge them into a podcast about accounting, which happens to be the second episode of the Fishbowl podcast with my friend Ellie Gembom. So anybody interested can listen back to that. Okay, so there was a lot of stuff there. I would say leaning closer to the philosophy side of things, and I do want to talk about that more. But I want to come back a little bit to the business. And we got to the point of rapid growth. So I'll list a bunch of things, and maybe you can touch on as many as you want. You're at this awesome location. The space is growing. Now, as a business owner, you were doing all this stuff before mostly. Now you have to hire people for other classes. There's a situation. You had to move locations. You added affiliates. And then also, dealing with people who don't honor their deals with you. You had some stuff like that. And I don't mean to talk about specifics, just the idea of dealing with those hurdles.
Yeah. Entrepreneurship is such a fascinating thing, such a wonderful thing, and challenging and enlivening. So yeah, we had this explosive growth as soon as we moved into that new gym, hired a Muay Thai instructor. So now we were not just a Jiu-Jitsu academy, an MMA school, which was, theoretically sexier than just a Jiu-Jitsu school. The complexity increased massively. The student who ended up investing in opening that spot had a business background, so in theory, it was okay that on that side of things, and I just had to, the thing is, as you grow, your responsibilities grow, and as we went from an 80-person gym to now like a 300, 400, 500-person gym. Even if I had nothing to do with any of the business side of it, like that's three, four, 500 conversations now that just mentally I've got to keep track of. Um, let alone so many more people to keep happy. So the level of complexity definitely increased, which was not something I'd could have anticipated what it really meant for life. Um, but this it's what I signed up for. I wanted uh, certainly the opportunity to have one of the bigger, nicer looking schools in the city. We already had one of the better ones from like a atmosphere perspective, I think, but that was very enticing. And so, few years of growth like that, hiring instructors, even in jiu-jitsu to kind of help uh, cover the volume of class. We had at some point like 4 jiu-jitsu classes a night and like 2 or 3 striking classes. Um, and so now you're not just you're not just the mechanic, you're the manager, and you got to manage people. That's a challenge a lot of entrepreneurs go through. Um, and the partner and I, both kind of naive and young in running this kind of business, um, didn't, cross our T's and dot our I's as well as we could have, and ran into a few icebergs really around 2015, both with kind of back taxes and then the location that we had invested so much in was we got a notice after a few other kind of roadblocks. We got a notice that the building was coming down, and because of some of the mistakes that had been experienced that we had made early on, my investor partner had not gotten any of his money back, and because of the dynamics of everything else going on, not only at risk of losing that, but was at risk of being really like due for all the damage we had kind of made in our exuberance or silliness. And so I didn't want to let our community down. Like, I just, I've had so many people tell me this place changed their lives. Um, it felt like, and it feels like something worth, saving. And so when we lost our old location, like Toronto prices, real estate wise, were already crazy, and then find a big space is also difficult to do downtown. We were one of those schools like on the outskirts. Everything would be a lot easier. Real estate's a lot cheaper, but I was going on every day on my bike, like looking. Real estate agents weren't helping. I was just like looking for lease signs, hustling to find a new space, and found one like right in time. Beautiful space, smaller, but met our needs at in Kensington Market in Toronto. Um, and we had 2 weeks between when we got the keys to the new place and when the old place was being demolished. So there was like such a scramble to kind of rebuild this place. And really, like I kind of joke, but I genuinely feel it. That whole experience, like the stress of not knowing whether we'd have a new space and I'd be letting all of our people down, and then their stress of like not knowing what was happening and this being such a big part of their lives, just added to my own stress. Being a leader, you got to manage the mindsets of your people, and so finally found a place, and then all this work and to build it so quickly, and like a lot of great help, but at the same time only from a few people, so it's still such a massive amount. Really, I feel like that whole experience put gray in my beard, and took a took about a year me just trying to stay positive and um, keep things running, and even like keeping competing during that time when everything else was going on, and like going to coach tournaments with students out of town. And then about a year later, I wouldn't say I had a nervous breakdown by any means, but I was stressed and angry about the situation we were in, and it was you know not really something I'm used to. I'm pretty positive and um, roll with the punches, so to speak. But this was a really challenging time, and I was frustrated about having to kind of make that big shift on my own and not having had the support that I'd, I guess, expected from everyone involved. Um, and then when we moved, and understandably, like, but it was still nonetheless hard. Our striking coach and basically instruction team left for a new spot after we had moved, so we effectively lost like 40% of students right away, and um, that was also tough. And um, yeah, it was a bit of a dark time um, when, after kind of catching my breath a year after the move, I'd realized like how much I had to sacrifice to kind of keep things going, um, and just how burnt out I was, and how you know we haven't even gotten to kind of this big impact idea, but really how I'd put so much aside for so long, and you know um, still have a great place and community, um, but I really felt like did not come out of that situation in the position I wanted. So I had to really kind of explore some of those internal frustrations for a good amount of time.
Okay. And we're very close to getting to those bigger ideas we keep alluding to. But just to sort of finish up on the open mat thing, at the time, at the location that you just moved from, and at the current location, I recall, seeing videos of world champions at the facility. I remember specifically one when John Jones was fighting in Toronto. He went to your facility and you had writing on the wall, and he made a comment on that. And so maybe you want to, not necessarily that specifically, but just the idea of, the martial arts journey and having these champions be in your gym, and what that meant to you.
Yeah, I mean, we've had John Jones, George St. Pierre, good friend of mine, Jorge Blanco, is coach to a number of like UFC champions, Rashad Evans, Michael Bisping, um, and so in order to like train with him, they would come through. What does that mean to me? I mean, it's cool. For me, I um, like it doesn't. I care, and this is kind of what makes OpenMat. I care as much, if not more, for the 40-year-old office worker who for whom jiu-jitsu is like reinvigorated them and gotten them healthy. And so, like, I've had some of the dads in our kids from our kids program who started training themselves told me that if this place changed their lives and like made them feel alive again. For me, that means a lot more than having a world champion come through. I respect them immensely, but I'm not really like a stargazer. I don't get too excited about the celebrity side of things. At the same, what I do appreciate about champions like that is just um, getting to understand or appreciate just how much work they've put in, and it's more. I care more. Like I care more. I care as much about the unknown champion who's accomplished a lot despite no one knowing their name because of the same hard work that they put in that a UFC champion did. Like I care more about you know I guess I'd say character than results, and so that was cool being exposed to these people that have just put in so much hard work rather than like the fact that they've got a name doesn't matter as much to me, but generally the writing on the walls at that old space got well received, and for me is exemplary of what you can make a business into, um, and that really has been the idea behind all of it, that we can use the business as a platform to do good. So the writing on the wall was, when you'd walk in right under the skylight, the first thing you'd see across this building beam is believe in yourself, and on the back wall, 5-foot high lettering, 50 feet across, it would say, "We're here to make the world a better place." And we had one of our old students, Keith Eagers, an artist. He drew a 9-foot high mural of the Earth on one of the walls, and really that those three kind of encapsulate the vibe, the atmosphere of the gym. Like, it's a place of positivity where we're not only trying to improve ourselves, but then take that positive growth out beyond our walls.
Okay. And once again, we're talking about that, making the world a better place, like your statement. And, almost ready to deep dive into that. But just one more thing, and maybe it's part of it too, is you're also the founder of Fight to Unite, which is a grappling competition that started in Toronto. It's more than that as well, as I'm sure you're about to tell me. Maybe you can talk about that. And also, if you can talk about the competition side of things, how far it's come from when you started versus where it is with Fight to Unite.
So cool. Competitions evolved immensely. My first competition was in a hockey arena with, like, the refs didn't know the rules. There were I think you had to start on the ground, and there were no submissions until a certain level. It was just very disorganized. People were trying to figure out in Canada, like, what BJJ, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, was. Now the professionalism of tournaments and of competitions being, like, live streamed all over the world is incredible. So yeah, Fight Tonight ran its first tournament in 2019 at Maple Leaf Gardens, and the idea behind it, as you said, it's more than just a tournament. It's really meant to be a bit of a bridge between the jiu-jitsu community and kind of doing good out in the world. But the idea being that Fight Tonight ultimately is intended to be a movement of martial artists speaking up for a better world, and that we, everyone who does jiu-jitsu is so enamored with it, and it's made such an impact on their lives, and was such a positive force for them and their communities, that it already is a force for good. But what if we as a community could actually stand together as an example to other communities and say, okay, we need to not just be about our little circle and our little hobby and passion, but in doing so also be a kind of player in the larger world, and use our platform and use our numbers and our community to stand up and speak up and say, it's time for a healthier way, healthier life, healthier world. So that's part of the vision, to use it as a platform to allow the jiu-jitsu community to speak as one for making a better world.
All right, that's great. And just an aside on that, a friend of mine competed in the first tournament, and I told you this in the past, but he was blown away with the professionalism and the quality of the competition, especially for a first tournament. I mean, I had a few competition matches a while ago, and as you mentioned, the refs didn't really know the rules. Nothing started on time. Competitors would be arguing with the referees. It was a mess, and it's gotten a lot better. And Fight to Unite is a great example of that. And so, talking about, doing more for the world, the world got, your business got smacked in the face in March. And, you responded, you responded in a way that I don't know that anybody could be expected to respond that way. It seemed like you really took the opportunity to think about what you could do to help others at this time. And maybe talk about what happened with COVID-19 and your school and martial arts schools, and then we'll use that as a springboard to the other stuff that we want to talk about.
Yeah, so I think at the beginning, sometime in March, didn't really know what was happening. And then at a certain point, it was clear, okay, this is a real thing and it's a serious thing, and it's not really the wisest thing to keep running classes and putting people at risk. And so we were one of the first schools to stop classes, and that was such a weird thing to wrap my head around. We've been around 12 years. I've been teaching for 15 years, and never, except for one time we had to do a deep cleanup or something. Like, we've never stopped classes, and certainly never made some grand announcement that they were halting operations. But a number of instructors reached out to me, kind of thanked me for kind of leading the way, showing some leadership on that end, and it was just the only thing to do. This is obviously, we now know, a serious situation, and OpenMat, like all martial arts schools, we love our people, and we're here to take care of them and make their lives better and the world better. And so if that means shutting down, that's the thing to do. So that's what we did. Like a lot of schools, tried to find what the right pivot was, in terms of online classes. So experimented with a few things there. And just try to keep the community better, or supported more, because as best we can, one of the things that martial arts does for people is it gives them a home and a community, and now, in a form of stress relief and all these wonderful things. Now we can't offer that to our people, but it's jiu-jitsu means gentle art. And really, it's the art of adapting rather than trying to be rigid and force a particular perspective or approach. You mold around the situation. And so, one of the things I said from the beginning is our mission is to serve our people. The how, we don't control. We don't control whether we're able to run classes or not. But that doesn't mean we can't serve our people. And so, run a few different community events, online classes. A lot of instructors have stayed with that. But the idea being that now we know the epidemic of mental health challenges, of isolation and loneliness in our society, and that's one of the things. Especially imagine you're an immigrant and come here with no, you come here by yourself. The power of finding a place like a jiu-jitsu gym to give you a community and give you a place where you're welcomed and someone knows your name, and not just there at home by yourself day after day, is so powerful. And now that's taken away. Okay, what can we do to support people? Our people have been extremely supportive, a lot of them paying memberships, even though obviously they're not training. And so it's been a challenge on a lot of levels, and tough things make you tough. And although this is, in a sense, the greatest existential crisis we've faced, having gone through all the challenges, from my neck to so many challenges in running a school to losing our location, having to rebuild, and having to kind of be hit with this massive tax bill, and having losing so many people in our move, and then losing the support of um, my investment partner, um, just meant I had to step up. And when you step up and you do something hard, you become strong. So now, it's like one of the I have part of my other stuff is connected to teaching kids. And one of the ways I talk to kids about, like, what are we? What are human beings? Not to be crass, but we take water in, something else comes out. We take food in, something else comes out. We take education and inspiration and conversations in, and poetry and architecture and art, and families come out. We are transmuters. Take one thing and make it something else. And so we all have the potential, and that goes back to that idea of responsibility not being obligation, but being your, break down the word, response ability, your ability to respond. You can take a traumatic experience and make it trauma. You can, and make it something that haunts you your whole life, and is not to, diminish the struggles of those doing that, or experiencing some of those pains. But you can also take a traumatic experience, turn it into something good, even if it's only the lesson you learn from it, or the lesson you can then share with others, or actually finding a new path that wasn't exposed to you before. And so for me, I think Jiu-Jitsu teaches a practical optimism. When you've seen that even what seems like time and again, an unstoppable, inescapable situation, and then you learn there's a way out, like, oh dang, anything can be solved, anything can be gotten out of. And so that's helped in facing situations like this, where really, like, I'm generally pretty positive. This thing might be the end of any school, right? And that's not something we control. You can't worry about what you don't control. What you can do is be aware of it and focus on what you do control. And this connects to how I see making a real difference in the world. It's like, we can worry about what we don't want, or we can start imagining and working towards what we do want. And for me, only the latter is productive. And so for me, this whole situation, whatever we decide to do with it, wherever we take it, it's like, I firmly believe we can take the bad and make it. And so that's big picture, that's even the mission, right?
Definitely. And so, you mentioned there, and you've talked about this several times, that the idea of helping others and making the world a better place is very important to you. And it's actually the most important thing to you. And it sounds like Jiu-Jitsu is a vehicle for that. And at the opening, I mentioned lastly that you are the founder of globalunity.org. And it sounds like that too is a different type of vehicle for making the world a better place. So maybe you can talk about what that is and what your vision of how to achieve that is.
So globalunity.org is really three things. It's a movement. Is the vision. It's a movement. It's a platform, and it's a game designed to unite humanity in the real world. And this is a concept. This is why I started the gym originally, Kimono Girl. Not so I could have a gym, but so that I could get this message out into the world. And I just knew that working 60 hours a week in the corporate world wouldn't afford me the time. And so the idea was that entrepreneurship would just be a breeze, and I'd be able to get this out quickly. But the whole vision, the whole idea that's been kind of taking the form of a book, is based on the recognition. As I said, I grew up, or I got exposed to people suffering, and I did what I thought you do, trying to help different human rights groups. But then I got exposed to. I saw a documentary called The Corporation, which talks about the history and the nature and structure of the corporation, and it showed me that and a few examples in the movie talk about how even when everyone in a company is a good person and is conscientious, the company can still inadvertently do harm. And I realized that the problems we're facing are systemic, and unless we fix the systems, that people would still suffer. And so jiu-jitsu gives you this practical optimism. It teaches you that anything can be solved, any problem can be solved, and specifically come up with what I call mental jiu-jitsu, which is imagine you're on the mats and someone keeps taking you down, taking you down, taking you down.
That doesn't happen.
Never. Well, not to you. For us mortals, the question is,
I just start on my back. That's how I avoid the takedowns.
I see.
Sorry.
The idea is that it can feel like you have a problem, but we know if everything can be solved, then you don't have a problem. Jiu-jitsu is asking you a question. How do you stop that takedown? And the way you stop a single leg takedown is defined by the fact that it's a single leg. It's going to be a very different answer for a double leg. And when you start jiu-jitsu, most of the time you're being spoon-fed information. Here's what you do here, here's what you do there. And in time, you might come across an answer, even if you have the best instructor in the world, where they don't know the answer. Or you might come across a situation where they don't know the answer, but you can reverse engineer, right? You can kind of figure it out. Okay, their hand is here. Well, I can't do this. What could I do? What if I hold their leg like this? What is that? Oh, that changes dynamics. And so mental jiu-jitsu is the process of turning problems into questions. And so recognizing that the problems we're facing were systemic, I started asking, okay, how could we recreate these systems? And that kind of took me on this journey. But it all came down to this recognition that the principles of success for society have to somehow mirror the principles of success for the individual. Principles of success for the individual say you're never going to create change by looking at what you don't like and saying that's no good, that has to change. You create personal success by creating a vision of the you want to be and then working on becoming that. So, 3 steps to a better world. Create a vision of what that world looks like. Figure out how to get from here today to there tomorrow, and then implement. And years ago, someone asked, okay, well, what's different between what you're doing and what the ancient Greeks or Adam Smith or Karl Marx tried to do in creating a better world? I said, what's different is we are different. The internet marked the birth of the potential for global telepathy. It was never before possible for us to think and speak as one. Who's qualified to create this vision? Not you, not I, not any one of us, only all of us together. And so one element of globalunity.org is a global social infrastructure design platform that's crowdsourced. So you and I and a million other people come together to design what this better world should look like. There are a number of other components to it, but that's a really important piece, right? So it's almost open sourcing civics, open sourcing, all the things that a city government does. Like, we no longer live. One of my favorite TED Talks is by a woman named Pia Mancini, and in it, she started something called Democracy, or she works with something called Democracy OS. But the quote that really resonated with me was, we're doing our very best to be 21st century citizens operating in a 17th century designed social structure that's based on 15th century information technology. When the pace of change was so slow 200 years ago, voting every 4 years as a way to participate in it as a citizen made sense. It's just no longer appropriate. We need something new, and the question is, who's qualified to create that? It can't be some enlightened leader from on high. It's got to be something we build together. And the simplest way to explain like what is the vision for global unity, if humanity really were working as a united whole, where's the platform that facilitates that? It doesn't exist. And so we need to build that. And you know, the if you think about the big challenges we face, the environment, for example, the first step in actually being able to do anything about it would be working together, working as a united world. If we don't have that, or we really get like, if China's not on board and the whole rest of the world tries to fix the environment, like, are we going to be able to do it? If any one country's not on, like, this is something we can only do together. And so what we need is not only conversations to move in that direction, but we need an actual legitimate plan. So happy to share whatever about the platform, but that's the big picture vision and the motivation behind it. And there's many elements to it, integrating entrepreneurship and business, gamification, but in spirit, it's everyone for everyone. And,
Okay.
Creating a platform to actually actualize that.
I get the impression you probably are familiar with Yuval Noah Harari. Yeah, so he pretty much talks about that in at least one of the books, Sapiens or Homo Deus. It's just like the 21st century is filled with problems that are not solvable by our existing institutions. You can't solve climate change with one country. You can't solve terrorism or artificial intelligence with one nation. You need the world to work together in some capacity. And the world has worked together in the past for some things, and in some ways we're working together now in this pandemic. And maybe that's demonstrating the power of what you're talking about. And then also on another note about us, the world is, we can now share each other's thoughts. And that's really what social media is, right? It's just like a stream of people's thoughts, and it's not always the most appetizing stream. So if we could improve that, that'd be great. Okay, so Global Unity is this platform that is designed to encourage people to work together and to crowdsource solutions to the big questions, I guess, facing us. And you mentioned that there's also a gamification aspect to it. So I guess, how far along is this project? When can people begin participating, or can they start participating now?
So one of the kind of, and then, when you first reached out to me about doing this, I said that there's two stories going on here. As I said, Elliott Marshall, who's a UFC fighter, invited me onto his podcast a month or two ago. And what struck him about my story was, you didn't do what others expected of you. You followed your dream. And the irony is, I feel like a bit of a fraud there, because in continuing to make OpenMat my sole focus, I haven't really been following my dream. And why? Well, we have all these people I'm responsible to, and and I'm known as the jiu-jitsu guy, and so in effect, I'm really still, I've fallen into that trap, as so many of us do, even though my whole story is supposed to be about the opposite of fulfilling the expectations of others rather than pursuing your dream. And so this time during COVID has been a chance to invest more time in that. I got to, and last weekend actually was really moving. I got to go to an online event. I went to the live one last year called Radical Exchange by a professor of economics and philosophy, I believe. Glenn Weil wrote a book called Radical Markets, introducing brand new concepts into how we can run an economy, how we can run a democracy, quadratic voting, quadratic funding, very different models, which are really cool. You should look into. But the founder of Ethereum, which is a big cryptocurrency, read his book, I guess, found him on Twitter. They got connected. And then they started this event bringing together Radical Exchange, bringing together entrepreneurs and change makers and artists and activists to really kind of start this conversation. And I got to meet through their online event. I got to meet so many wonderful change makers, founders of Democracy Earth, and people who worked at the World Economic Forum and tech kind of mavericks. And it was the first time I got to speak openly about all this stuff and really like um, allow that part of myself to be heard. And it was so wonderful and empowering, and so wonderful to see that there are communities of people really working to make the world a better place. Um, the kind of story behind the story is that I'm not a tech guy. I don't, have even web development skills are something I've had to even that and social media are things like I'm grinding through learning because I don't have someone to kind of build the platform for me. Um, so even just now, globalunity.org is at the place, like as of this recording, where at least someone can leave their email to find out more for when we're at, the next phase. So right now, having some interesting conversations with people that do have kind of the skills that I'm lacking to kind of build a real platform, but it's I would say a fairly well designed concept, but and there's a lot of support behind it, but um, it's going to be and the without getting too into the weeds, by necessity, it's going to be something that rolls out gradually in phases. So phase one, there's no functionality there. That might be true of phase two too, but now at least people can kind of give their email and find out more. But I've had to kind of hack my way to, not coming from money or having money, not having a co-founder, not having those tech skills myself. The question is, how do you get something like this off the ground? Which is ultimately why, like, we didn't really talk about fight like a girl or fight like a man, or so many other things we've done in the gym. But really, the motivation behind that was to try to position myself to get this off the ground. So now, finally, 10 years later, um, the book is on its way to getting finished. The platform is in its infancy, I would say, but the ideas have been vetted with some very smart people, and now it's just kind of at the phase where it's growing slowly. But anyone who is interested in supporting or finding out more or any of the above can reach out directly to me or go to globalunity.org and sign up for the mailing list, where we'll be kind of slowly teasing out developments and the bigger picture. And yeah, the one of the pieces of feedback I got from a very very smart friend who's kind of a tech entrepreneur himself was that there are a lot of like mind blowing technologies and mechanisms out there, like quadratic voting, quadratic funding. What's happening in the cryptocurrency space is amazing. There's so many other cool technologies, but all of them tend to not have a clear vision or a clear mission of where they want to take the world. And then there are all sorts of wonderfully intended goodwill missions that have a beautiful vision, but haven't addressed the practical side. And this, I believe, marries the two very well, where it's, a strong mission, but there's a strong plan behind it. So, I appreciate not only the chance to talk about it, because it's for me, I feel like it's my life's purpose, but I feel like we need to be having these conversations more, and I feel very strongly about the power of podcasts and these kinds of platforms to help not only get your message out, but then help others get theirs. So I really appreciate you giving me opportunity for us to catch up and share as jumbled as the story was, a bit of my story and vision for where we can take things.
No, thank you. To be honest, this podcast is mildly inspired by you. So I came to see you a couple years ago. It was the first time we'd trained in a long time, and you were kind enough to chat with me for a while afterwards. And I told you about some life changes that I made that typically I won't beat around the bush. I got divorced, and for most people, getting divorced is a really shitty thing. But for me, it was actually a really good thing, positive experience. And you were encouraging me to tell that story and to help others. And you had some specific suggestions that just didn't quite work for me. But the idea of, okay, there is something I can do to help people. I, I want to help people. And so I don't know how exactly, but this podcast is a way of doing that. And I've hopefully had some guests that are inspiring people, and yourself helping people with global unity, and before global unity, just even helping people with jujitsu and deal with their own insecurities and self-confidence that jiu-jitsu brings is great. And so thank you for inspiring that. And then when global unity, when you've got more to share and more to talk about and announce, you are of course welcome to come back and share that with the audience. One last thing I did want to give you a chance to talk about, we didn't mention it, is you are working on a book that is coming out called Sales Jiu Jitsu. So maybe there's something you'd like to say about that.
Yeah, so there are a lot of other projects that I've done or do that we haven't gotten to talk about. One of which is Mastermind BJJ, which is private BJJ training for kind of high level entrepreneurs. Through that, I met my co-author Daniel Moskowitz, who's you know been in sales for decades, corporate sales, and he resonated with how I teach and some of the kind of life lessons and business lessons that come out of jiu-jitsu. And we just got talking. One of the Andrea Palmer's a CEO herself, is in that group. Just joked that we should co-author a book, and then we got talking, like the idea. So I created, with Daniel's help, I created what we call the uh, Jiu-Jitsu Success Formula. And it looks at, there are a lot of people and books trying to take life lessons from jiu-jitsu and apply them elsewhere, and that's beautiful. And there are some excellent lessons from the mats. But rather than just try to look at those, I tried to make it a little more practical and look not just at jiu-jitsu, but the practice of prepping for, fighting in, winning, and learning from a competition as an analogy for facing any challenge in life. And so it's a very, I think, an elegant framework that's got four major parts: pre-fight, fight, winning, and then post-fight. And then we break that down into, each of it has subcomponents, and those subcomponents have subcomponents. That's really a process for winning at anything. And then we use sales analogy or sales engagement as an analogy for a fight, and then apply that to sales engagement. So there's never really been certainly a sales book like this. Daniel's got so much actual sales knowledge and experience and wisdom, and little hacks and tricks that he shares in the book. We're even talking about the Jiu-Jitsu success formula that the book is based on is so strong. Probably going to release it as a separate book as well. So that's coming together and should be out, I think, in November. It's with the editor now. Also, one of the things I'm most excited about on the kind of practical level is also BJJ 101, which is because of, as a student of jiu-jitsu and as a teacher, I've been kind of wanting for so long to have an organized structure to not only as a student but as a teacher. I've created two courses. The first is basically an intro to BJJ course for beginners called the BJJ Primer. And that really covers a lot of the concepts and theories and frameworks behind jiu-jitsu that you never really learn in a class. That I feel like just accelerates people's training. It's something we share with all of the students who come to OpenMat. And then the Blue Belt curriculum is the second course, and this is something we use as our actual curriculum in school. Hayabusa Academy uses it at their school. OpenMat Bermuda is going to be using it as well. There are a number of other schools we're talking to that will be incorporating this as their curriculum, but the idea being that this is one of the problems in jiu-jitsu is because instruction is so disorganized, no one's fault, but you'll find a good blue belt who just doesn't know how to deal with a basic situation. Because what separates jiu-jitsu is their actual skill. Can they actually handle someone of their own level? But then they'll end up in a basic situation where they just haven't been exposed to that technique. So trying to kind of solve for that, I don't want to talk about it forever, but this curriculum covers so much material. Most jiu-jitsu curricula, if they exist, most schools they don't, have 50 to 150 techniques. This has 300, but it has a very easy to follow format. I don't know if you've seen the 10th Planet warm-ups, but they're basically just sequencing techniques. This does that, but it does it for beginner level techniques. So this for me is designed to kind of create the perfect blue belt. It's been years and years and years of work. So I'm really proud of it. I'm excited for people to see it. It's hard to wrap your head around what it is because it's just so big, but put those two courses together and got a membership site as well at BJJ101.tv. So with that, Sales Jiu-Jitsu, BJJ101.tv, and finishing a book, Understanding Jiu-Jitsu, which is more my kind of opus on the art of Jiu-Jitsu itself. Those are some things coming out soon. So
awesome. A lot of stuff to look forward to. So yeah, I can't wait for any of it. And you're, welcome to come back and talk about all of it, or just, reminisce. We can talk about a lot of books. I think you mentioned a bunch that I've read and could probably deep dive, but that wasn't the topic of today. So yeah, thank you very much. Thank you so much, Elliott, Professor Elliott Bayev. So happy to be joined by you. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to the people at home?
General message is believe in yourself, dream big, position yourself, work hard, get into a good position because we need you in a good position to make a bigger impact. Not to suggest anyone's not making a big enough one, but we need to build something better. And the more people we have in as good positions as we can, the more we can do. So, yeah, just lots of love and positivity, and hard work in the right directions can do a lot. So, lots of support sent out.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me, and I can't wait to talk to you again.
Thank you.
I want to thank Professor Bayev for joining me today to talk about his work in martial arts and trying to make the world a better place. Also, thank you to everyone who's listening at home. We'll be back soon with another episode. Until then, farewell.